In a cold, barren land, far, far away, there lived a polar bear named Billy Pole. Billy was a beautiful musician of incredible talent. One day Billy's agent, Mr. Norwal, called her and said, "So how do you feel about playing at a concert with Melton John this weekend? All the proceeds will be given to conservation efforts." Melton was a fabulous Arctic fox, and Billy and Melton were great friends and had gone on tour together many times before, so it was no surprise that Melton wanted to play together again. Billy was also an avid supporter of conservation and loved to play music, especially with her friends, so she excitedly told her agent, "Why, of course I'd love to have a concert with Melton. Let me gather my things and I can make the hike in 3 days." Her agent replied, "Sounds great. I'll call Melton and get publicity underway." Billy hung up the phone and immediately began packing. Since she would be on foot, she'd have to pack lightly. She decided on a sparkly red dress for the concert and packed up her toiletries and put it all in her backpack. She also packed some seal blubber bars since she'd be making a long trek across the ice caps and didn't know when she'd have another chance to hunt. It was late in the day after she finished packing, so she decided to go hunting and then get a good night's rest so she'd be ready for traveling. She began her hunt but couldn't find any seals. The temperature had been heating up and melting away the ice, so seals available for hunting were becoming scarce. She settled with a large meal of fish instead, but the fish just weren't the same as seals because they lacked the delicious layer of blubber that Billy loved so much. She also needed the calorie-rich blubber because of the long hike she would be making. However, she realized that beggars can't be choosers, and she settled with her meager meal of fish. She then went to sleep for the evening so she'd be well rested for her trip. The next morning, Billy woke up with a growling stomach. She knew she didn't have time to hunt before leaving, so she ate one of her seal blubber bars that she loved so very much. Then she gathered her things and began her long hike. She walked for 10 hours, growing hungrier by the minute. After her 10-hour hike, she reached a broken-up patch of ice. She knew this was a great place to hunt seals, and she was starving, so she sat and waited for a seal to come out of the water. She only had to wait about 15 minutes before she saw something approaching from the water. She quietly waited until it popped its head up out of the water. As soon as it stuck its head up, she realized it was a walrus, and not a seal. Normally, Billy would wait for a seal to come along, because she didn't like the taste of walrus, but she was extremely hungry, so she decided to go for it. And though Billy was an expert hunter, this was a very old, wise walrus. He had seen Billy right before his head broke the surface of the water. He realized he'd have to swim fast to avoid this attack. Billy jumped into the water on top of the walrus, but he was smart and already turned over on his back and had his tusks up. When Billy jumped on the walrus, she stuck one of her paws through his tusk. She wasn't expecting it and was stunned momentarily. She then became angry and started yelling, "Come back here, you fat, ugly walrus!" as he swam away. "I need energy to finish my hike to my concert with Melton John." At this moment, it clicked to the walrus that he had an opportunity to save himself. He yelled back, "But global warming has caused the ice to melt too much for you to get there. You'll never make it in time with an injured paw." He then added, "But I know a shortcut that I'll share with you if you promise not to eat me." Billy weighed her options. The walrus could be lying, but she'd never make it in time without his help. She was an excellent swimmer, but now that she had an injured paw, she'd never be able to swim across the gap in enough time to make it to the concert. She had to hope for the best and accept his offer. "Fine," she said. "I'll accept your help in exchange for not eating you." She ate a few seal blubber bars in defeat, and the walrus introduced himself to her. "Hello, my name is Chucky Darwin. I thank you greatly for not eating me." Billy grumbled, Yeah, sure, let's just start this trip. I'm kind of in a hurry." Chucky said, "All right, crawl on my back and let's go." Billy reluctantly agreed, and they began the long journey across the water. After about an hour, Chucky said, "So would you like to hear a story?" Billy didn't say anything, so Chucky began talking anyway. "I'm sure you've wondered before where you came from, and why you're one of the few animals adapted to our climate." "Well, I suppose I have," Billy replied. "Fantastic," Chucky said. "I'll tell you all about it." Chucky began his story. About 100,000 to 250,000 years ago, a number of grizzly bears probably became isolated by glaciers, and this led to allopatric speciation. Many probably died on the ice, but some survived due to the fact that organisms vary. That is, every litter of grizzlies would have had a different variation in coat thickness and other necessary things they needed to survive. This would give an evolutionary advantage to some individuals of each litter. Successful individuals repeated this process. So these new variation of bears weren't necessarily better or any more perfect on an absolute bear scale. They were just more adapted to their environment than their ancestors. Today, polar bears are well adapted to their harsh northern environment. And did you know that the first polar bear was a brown bear subspecies, with brown bear dimensions and brown bear teeth? Over the next 20,000 years, body size and teeth began changing. As late as 10,000 years ago, polar bears still had a high frequency within the population of brown bear-type molars. Only recently have they developed polar bear-type teeth. There is a perfectly complete evolutionary sequence without any real gaps. The transition was slow and gradual throughout, and it's difficult to say where one species ends and the next begins. The history of the polar bear is a wonderful demonstration of one of my favorite topics, evolution. Billy contemplated his story for a moment and finally replied, "Well, if my species was able to adapt to cold, would we ever be able to adapt back to a warm climate?" Chucky said, "That's an excellent question, Billy, but one that only time can tell." He continued, "It would be wise for the humans of the world to treat the environment with respect and recognize that they are not the only creatures on the planet, instead of expecting the rest of us to adapt to their lifestyles." Billy responded, "You make an excellent point, but what if it's too late for the ice caps to recover? Just look at how much has been lost." Chucky sighed and said, "I know. I just hope there's a chance for recovery." At that moment, Billy saw a dot off in the distance. "Look!" she yelled. "It's the island where I'll be playing in the concert with Melton. We're actually going to make it on time." Chucky began swimming faster, and they made it to the island in an hour. When they got there, Billy thanked Chucky profusely for both the lesson and the ride. She then offered him backstage passes to the show. Chucky had secretly always been a fan of Melton and Billy, so he hugged her and shouted, "Oh, thank you so much! I can't wait!" Billy and Chucky checked into their hotel, and they slept the day away until concert time. When it was time for the concert, Billy got dressed in her beautiful sparkly red dress she'd bought that miraculously made the trip unscathed. Billy met up with Melton and Chucky for a lovely pre-concert dinner where they had fresh seal. After dinner, they hurriedly returned to the venue, and Melton and Billy played the best show of their entire lives.